small till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't. I'm building up a wall till it breaks. She hated when I call and it's late. I don't wanna keep you waiting. I hope I never keep you waiting. She think I know it all, but I don't.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Mixtape with Scott. I'm the host, Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor of economics at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. This is a podcast that's a series of conversations with living economists where we talk about not just their ideas, and we don't talk about the real world. We do talk about the real world. We talk about their world. We talk about their lives, what they dreamed of becoming as kids, the toys they played with, the books they used to read, the mentors who shaped them, how they found their way into this strange and wonderful world of economics. And the stories are basically never the same. Somewhere along the way, oftentimes without realizing it, we also end up talking about some of the most creative and credible research being done in our field. And today's guest is one of those people. Today's guest is Michael Anderson. He's a professor of agricultural and resource economics at the UC Berkeley, or at UC Berkeley. Michael's somebody whose work I've admired for a long time. He fits in one of the little series that I'm doing, of course, on causal inference and people in the credibility revolution because he was a student of Josh Angrist. He's written on a wide range of topics: health policy, education, environmental economics, and especially transportation. And he's always been someone that I would read and just think that this was like unusually, he does his work with unusual methodological care. Maybe not unusual, but it really stands out when you read him. In addition to the applications being, I think, really interesting. So one of his papers in particular, the first paper that I really ever saw Michael Anderson's name and then remembered to make a note of it, was on the benefits of college athletic success. And it is one of the most credible and unusual applications of the propensity score that I've ever seen. I told him in the talk, if you took every paper that has ever been written that uses the propensity score and you added them up and you made that the denominator, and then in the numerator, you picked the ones that probably are satisfying that selection on observables assumption, it would be like vanishingly small. So small, honestly, that I've just kind of, when I teach it, I don't even make a big deal about it anymore because it's like, what am I going to do? And, but one of those ones that would be in the numerator is Michael's paper on the benefits of your college being successful in athletics. It's in the Review of Economics and Statistics. Highly encourage that you read it. You will come away and go, well, I just read the most credible use of the propensity score that's ever been written. So I can chalk that off my bucket list. So before we get there, though, we talked about his childhood. We talked about him going to MIT, working with David Otter, working with Josh Angrist, what it's like to kind of grow up in the middle of all that work. And Michael was just super generous with his time, super generous and candid and open with his heart and the sharing of his story. And we laughed and reflected and just got into weeds on some of his work. And it was just a snapshot of a life in progress, but I really enjoyed the hour and a half with him. And I think you're going to enjoy it too. So I'm going to turn it over to those guys now and let them get started. Well, it's a pleasure to have my guest this week. It's someone that I think we've only talked once, probably, right? It was a long time ago.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Michael
It was like
Anderson.
2018.
2018?
I still have the email, yeah.
That makes sense. Because that would have been, I remember now, I was probably thinking about the book and stuff. Well, Michael Anderson, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I
Could
I really feel privileged to be able to talk to you today.
Cool. Well, can you tell us, for the sake of the listener, your full title and who your boss is?
Sure. So my full title is Professor of Agricultural and Resource Economics here at UC Berkeley. My boss, I mean, I don't know, Jeremy Magruder is like the chair of our department right now,
Okay.
and Rich Lyons is the chancellor. But
Okay. Okay.
I don't answer to either of them too often.
Well, before we get started, I was wondering if we could just do an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you took, that you've taken before? It doesn't matter when, that you still find yourself thinking about it every now and then.
Sure. So I don't. So let me like full disclosure. I'm a fan of your work in general. I hadn't listened closely to this podcast until like a couple days ago, and then like the one thing I got in my media training from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation when I did my postdoc is like if somebody ever interviews you, like listen to what they've done in the past, so you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
So I anticipated that question. I actually listened to David Otter's episode because he's my PhD thesis advisor.
Oh,
And I am like, so I've gone back and forth on whether or not I should share. I'm going to, and we'll just see where it leads. I guess the only thing I'll ask is like, just, just, just let's just have the podcast and the interview go as if it otherwise would normally. So the vacation I have in mind was a vacation that we took to Disneyland last February.
okay.
And
Wait,
the
which one's
reason
Disneyland? Disneyland, the
Disneyland is
one or
California.
California? Okay.
Exactly. California, not what is it, Orlando or something like that. That's
Yeah.
Disney World. We also went to Disneyland Tokyo, but that's separate.
Oh.
And the reason that it stands out is because, well, so I have to give background so it'll make sense. The background is that in like late 2022, my wife was diagnosed with a brain tumor,
Oh.
which is, as you can imagine, a very serious diagnosis. And so anyway, she just went into the ER with some strange but not like super concerning symptoms, and then they did an MRI, and they're like, "Oh, there's like a brain tumor there. That's why you have these symptoms."
Mm.
And so we quickly transferred to UCSF. I think you also do work related to health and so forth. And so it's like, one thing I learned as health economist is like, if you have something serious, you need to go to the place where they like handle it a lot, right? So it's like, okay, we're not staying in like local hospital, we're going to like UCSF, right?
Mm.
So we did that, and then they did surgery like the next week. Then it's followed by radiation. Then it's followed by chemotherapy. And then at some point, you get to the point where they offer like to prescribe this thing called a tumor treating fields device to you, which is it's like got these electrodes that strap onto your head. It's maybe the size of like a laptop or something like that. And so then you're carrying around this small bag with you. And it's the device, unlike chemo or something, it's like the device only works like it's only effective when it's on. So you're literally hauling this thing around with you like up to 24 hours per day. You basically take, a few hours off every couple days or something like that.
Mm.
And it's been proven in clinical trials, and part of the reason I'm bringing all this up is because like it's actually been a very interesting journey for me to sort of like the interface, the interaction between my professional life and professional training, and then this obviously very sort of personal side
Yeah.
has been interesting and kind of enlightening in ways that one might not have expected or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's been proven in clinical trials. So we did it, and so she carries it around with her most of the time. And so we went to Disneyland. This was February 2024. And so she's carrying around this device again. It's like, it's you put in a small backpack or something. It's not like super intrusive or anything, but people, if they look, they'll see that you're wearing these like electrodes with these wires coming out under your
Mm.
hat or whatever. And so we went there with our children and a friend. We're doing all the rides, and then we did a ride called Rise of the Resistance, where it's like the idea is like you're rebels. It's a Star Wars ride. It's like you're rebels, and you get captured by the Empire, and then they like take you into their like prison system or whatever. And then at some point, you basically escape, like, some other rebels break in and like you escape with them. So that, like, the production quality is like super high and everything. It's like pretty amazing when you actually go down. You're like, where am I? Like you're in some underground tunnel, it seems like, and everything. But they have, there's like lots and lots of quote unquote cast members, like Disney staff there. And they are like kind of, especially the supposed imperial officers are like barking orders at you and everything, right? And so, and they generally try not to like break character. But you get to
Mm.
this point where they have to transfer you from like, the imperial detention people or whatever to like what's effectively sort of the ride part of it. It's almost like a roller coaster, but the vehicles are like, they have like tires and, like computer controlled or whatever. And so when they do that, they have to like, they have to break character to some degree in the sense that like they need to actually check your like seatbelts and stuff, right? To make sure it's like
Right.
safe before they
Yeah.
release you. Uh, and so this supposed like rebel operative or whatever is like strapping us in. This was like the third or fourth time we had done the ride. And so we kind of knew what to expect. But then he like points at my wife's device, and he's like, show me that or whatever, right? And we're like kind of confused because we're like, okay, on the one hand, is this supposed to be like part of the ride? Like if we were the imperial officers, we'd understand that like, oh, they're trying to give you a hard time because they'll sometimes yell at you and stuff like that. And so we thought maybe he was like sort of acting, but we're like, it doesn't really make sense because he's supposed to be on our side. So like, why is he like, harassing us? So then we went to like, oh, it must be like part of the safety check. And so then she starts trying to explain to him. She's like, no, 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 they already checked it at like the entrance. They said it's okay. We've done this ride before and so forth. And in the middle of all this, it's like there's all these sound effects. It's like it's really hard to even if we're like yelling at each other and we can barely hear, right? But then he's like, no, like it's like my son, I think you're wearing the device my son is wearing.
Ah.
And so we're like, oh, and like it turns out, yeah, his son and my wife is she's in her early 40s. So she's like young for this disease, the same thing that like what are Ted Kennedy and like John McCain got or like
Mm.
and but his son is even younger. I mean, he must have been like his 20s or something like that.
Mm.
But yeah, it's like, my son is like wearing this device and like he gets treatment at like UC Irvine because we're like down in, SoCal and so forth. And he's like, this is the first time I've ever seen anybody like on the ride, like wearing it. And so it was like very touching. And then like he finally like it's clear to us, okay, fine, what's going on. And then he like straps us in and everything. He like says on it, he's like, it's gonna work. Like he's been good for like 3 years now or something like that. So it
That's
was just
great.
the most sort of unexpected connection, or like a connection in the place where you sort of place in time where you might least expect it.
Oh, that's cool. Wow. But that was a really great thing for both of y'all, but both him and
Yeah,
the kind of,
both. Yeah, I think him and us. Yeah,
yeah, because the disease is rare and the device is rare and the experience of the loved ones are rare too. They don't meet other
yeah,
people that have gone through it. Oh,
exactly.
that's neat. That's neat. Um, well, thanks for sharing that. So, well, where did you grow up?
I grew up pretty close to here. So I grew up actually just over the hills in a small town called Orinda, which was like adjacent to Berkeley.
Oh, okay. What'd your parents do for a living?
Well, so that's a complicated question. So I sort of like in my mind, I sort of have three parents. My biological parents separated when I was very young, like arguably maybe before I was even born.
Mm.
And so I grew up with my mother and my stepfather here in Berkeley, and then my biological father, when I was growing up, he lived on the East Coast, but he was originally from Asia, so we actually moved back to Asia
Oh,
later on. And the so the things they did, like it maybe is not surprising where I ended up. So my mother was a math PhD, although she ended up kind of going into programming and so forth, not really teaching.
hmm.
My stepfather, also a math PhD. He was a professor here at UC Berkeley. He retired maybe about like 20 years ago, almost now,
Right
I
when you
think.
got there?
But yeah, right around the time. I mean, he was still emeritus. He would like be going in. I mean, even now, I think he still comes into campus like once a week or something like that.
Oh,
So I had ties to Berkeley at a young age, and in fact, believe it or not, my mother worked as a staff programmer in this department when I was
in
like
the
in
in the
elementary
ARE
school at
department?
some point.
In the ag
Yeah,
econ department?
that chair who hired me was actually like one of her old bosses, but he
No
didn't
way.
realize. until he made the offer. He didn't realize who I was.
Oh my
I kid it.
gosh. Oh,
And
wait, your
then
mom did what for the department?
she
She
was
was,
like a staff programmer. This was like back, this is, Scott, this is like in the 80s when like computers were like the size of your desk and you had to
oh,
like,
so the
I don't know if they had
faculty didn't
punch
know how to
cards, but I feel
do
like
it.
they had tapes or something like that. Like,
Right. Wait,
uh,
so the faculty didn't necessarily do it. They had to have workers with those skills.
yeah, and she was a database programmer. So I don't know if she was doing the statistical stuff or is
Yeah,
just the
yeah.
sort of like maintaining and and providing access to the data and stuff like that.
Wow. How many did the
But it was
department have? She the only one?
I was the only one she was the only one I was aware of. Again, I was like 7 years old or something. Like I didn't have a lot of consciousness exactly what was going on or like
I'd
what she
never
was
heard
doing.
of that. I've never heard that before. I guess I just always assumed for some reason the faculty were having to learn how to work with the tapes, but I didn't really think about it.
Yeah, I don't know. She worked for Jeff Perloff, and then the late
Wow.
Peter Burke. They were both here when still here when I started, and Jeff still is.
Wow. So you just grew up real so that's close to Berkeley where you grew up, that town.
Yeah, it's just over the hills, it's like 20, 30
Oh,
minute drive.
wow. So what kind of stuff did you do as a kid? What kind of games and activities did you like?
I don't, I'm like one of those people who I feel like if I applied to college now, I'd have a really hard time because I didn't have a ton of like extracurriculars or anything like that.
Hmm.
Like in high school, I had like four or five super close friends, and that was about it. And we did various things. I mean, my best friend and I would do a lot of biking, like it was how we got to school, and then like also just do like side trips and so forth.
Yeah.
We biked like halfway down the Central Valley at some point. I forget, maybe like freshman or sophomore year or something like
How
that.
long does that take?
Uh, well, I mean, if you went all the way to like SoCal, it would take several days. We went out like 80 or 90 miles one day and then like camped overnight
Oh,
and came
that's
back.
fun.
But yeah.
Were you riding your
Uh,
bike as a little kid, like when you were like in grade school?
no,
Your
because
parents let you do
Orinda,
that
so the
kind
thing
of
is
thing?
Orinda is like super hilly.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
not, you can't send like you can't send like a 7-year-old out like riding bikes. Like it would be dangerous because like the roads are narrow and windy,
Oh,
and it would just be too steep and stuff. So yeah, it wasn't something I really got into until like high school
so
or
you were
so.
probably, I think we might be the same age. You were probably born in the mid 70s.
Yeah, yep. I think we are because I was class of 99 in
I was
college.
class of 99 also.
Okay, yeah.
Um, well, so like, what about toys and stuff like that? Did you have certain kind of things you really liked or books or anything?
Yeah, I mean, when I was smaller, I read a lot of books. My parents were like, maybe believe is not the right word, but like we didn't have a TV growing up. So I didn't, all
Oh,
the TV exposure I got was at like friends' houses and stuff like that. So
yeah,
there's no TV and then obviously no like Nintendo or anything like that because that would
right.
require a TV to hook up to. So yeah, I remember reading a lot of books, just kind of playing outside. It was like I mean, it's a Rinda's like it's a suburb, but it's kind of almost semi-rural. So like there's a lot of like kind of wooded area and stuff
Mm,
like that. I grew up across the street from a pool. So like various points, I was always very comfortable in the water, but it wasn't, it's not like I, spent the entire summer in the pool or anything
got
like
it.
that.
Got it. Well, what did you want to be when you grew up before high school? What were you thinking
Like before high school or like in high school?
before, like when you were
Yeah,
like
before
those,
high
like,
school, I don't know. I mean, I think I always had an interest in like transportation, especially like trains and planes, which has kind of come through in some of my papers
totally.
subsequently,
Yeah.
probably. I think at one point I was like, oh, I'd like want to be a pilot, but yeah, I think by middle school I was already somewhat academically oriented, so people were like, oh, you just get bored. Like it's not, at the
Oh.
end of the day, you're just kind of managing the plane and stuff like that. Plus, it wasn't clear like how you would actually, end up there. Given how the airline industry has evolved, I'm glad I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Um, and then high school, I really didn't know. I remember when I was like, I don't know, maybe freshman, sophomore. I said like I didn't have a TV growing up, but I did watch it at my friends. And so my best friend and I, one of the things we watched was Star Trek. It was like the Next Generation era.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, it's too bad like Starfleet officer isn't an actual, career because it's like a combination of like, oh, you can actually use intellectual skills and like
Right.
use your brain while also being like interesting and kind of exciting and so forth.
Yeah, right, right. Uh, okay, so it's like semi-rural. So probably the transition from middle school to high school is not what might not have been dramatic. It's like, was it still kind of like it was the same, you knew everybody, or like
Yeah, it's the
you
same people
recognized
because it's like
faces?
there's like, three or four elementary that all feed into one middle school, and then that
Mm,
middle school feeds into high school. And so, I mean, there's a little bit of like, people migrating in and out and stuff, but it was, a lot of the same,
is
a
the
lot of
same
the same
people you'd
people.
seen
Yeah.
before. Yeah, it was so funny when I was in high school, it was one of those massive high schools with like, 2,000 people. And I remember one day just going, I every day I see people, I've never seen them before in my life. I've been here for 5 years, and every day, most of these people, I don't feel like I've ever laid eyes on them. It was that sort of these
Wow.
giant high schools. They're
How
just
many
like,
students?
well, I mean, our
Like what, 5,000 or something? Or
each class had like 500 people, so it was like
okay,
2,000 total or something.
I
But
see.
I also
Hmm.
probably wasn't quite paying attention, but it's still I didn't recognize him. Yeah, so but you kind of grew up in a place where it was a little more seamless. There was a lot more.
Yeah, and so right, so it's like the same cohort for like what, 7 years or something like that, and the high school is not that large. I think it was about 200 students per class. So,
Mm,
I wasn't friends with them, but like I kind of could probably recognize and
yeah,
name everybody in the
right, right, right.
class.
Well, so what classes did you like, and what classes did you not like?
What, in high school?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really dislike too many. Maybe Spanish. I sort of felt like learning the language was not, I don't know, it just seemed more like memorization, so not as interesting.
Hmm.
And then English was always like, I'm a more quantitative person, and uh, so that I always found in some sense more challenging than like math or physics or anything like
Mm,
that.
yeah.
Although at the same time, as I got older, I appreciate the just like the act of writing and being able to communicate and so forth. And so in that sense, like I don't think I disliked it. Uh,
But
I
you
actually I
like
took
math and physics because you've got
I
that. It's in your
guess
blood a little bit.
yeah, although it was always sort of like, the funny thing is when I got to college, not to jump ahead, but like when I got to college, I took BC calculus by junior year.
Uh-huh.
And so then I had basically maxed out what our high school offered in terms of math. And I actually ended up taking a couple of classes at Berkeley during my senior year. So one of them
Oh,
was discrete math, and then the second one was a course known as EAP 1, which is like I don't know what the exact title is, but it's basically like intro micro. And
microeconomics. It was an intro
yeah, so
microeconomics class.
so EAP 1, sorry, that's a Berkeley thing. Environmental economic policy. It's the undergrad major of my department. Uh,
Oh,
and so in one of the other like weird connections, the instructor of EAP 1, when I took it, was a guy named Keith Gillis, who was later the dean of the College of Natural Resources when I got hired here as a faculty member.
he was your instructor in high school?
No, well, yeah, I was in high school, but he was a college, like he was teaching the class at Berkeley, right? And I was like
Right.
taking it as a high school student. And
Yeah.
he did a thing where he would have his like admin or whatever photograph each of the students so that he would, because this was like before they like, had online rosters with photographs and like so it's like
Yeah.
they would photograph the student and then, basically attach a name to it. Uh, and then he would keep these. And so when I interviewed in like 2006, I was like, at some point you meet the dean, and I was like, you probably have a photo of me in that like filing cabinet somewhere. And so he had his person like go and find it, which was somewhat embarrassing because it's like, a picture of me in high school or whatever. But they actually like dug it up while I was a job
Oh my
candidate
gosh.
and
Oh my
uncovered
gosh.
it.
He must have been so tickled when he saw that.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Wow. Well, so at the end of high school, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I think it was still a little bit unclear. I think at that point I was definitely leaning towards economics as a subject.
Oh, because of
Uh,
that
so
class? Because of that class?
Well, so I took the class. That was my first intro, really, I guess, to economics,
Uh-huh.
and I enjoyed it. I did well. Oh, I guess I never answered I actually never answered like the one question fully. What do my parents do? So my biological father, he, he has like a PhD in like sociology, I guess, and was a sociologist at like Temple University for a little while, but then he like moved into banking, and he
Mm,
moved to New York, and then continued doing banking like when he moved back to Asia and stuff. And so
mm,
he had always been like my two parents here in the US were very, sort of mathematical. I mean, they also, it's like Berkeley and stuff, so they were pretty socially liberal and so forth.
right.
But like my biological father was somewhat less mathematical, but had like a real kind of like has, I guess, still a real kind of like activist streak in
Well,
him. And so I think from my perspective, it was like, by the time was going to college, I was sort of like, well, I'm pretty good at math on the one hand, but I want to do something that's more kind of like, policy and socially oriented and so forth. And so then I was like, well, economics is kind of a combination of those two. I mean, I think that's true of
oh,
many, economists that you
yeah.
come across, that it's kind of like,
Hmm.
trying to mix or merge those two worlds together. And so I think that's, I was leaning that way. Now, hilariously, because I had taken so much math in high school, I think when I got to college, I was like, oh, basically, I'm not going to take any more math now. Obviously, going to an econ PhD, that was not the last math that I took.
So you thought when you got to college, you were I'm going to do econ, but you weren't going to do math. That's what you're saying. When you
Yeah,
got there,
like
you thought it was
I
over.
was like, I think I've taken enough now. Like, I probably don't need to do too much more or something like
Right,
that.
right. And you're like
That was not how it
it's
worked
only
out.
begun.
Yeah, exactly.
So you end up so what did you want to be? You're
So
going to
I
do
was
econ.
I declared econ as a major pretty quickly. And I went to Swarthmore, so it's like a small liberal arts college. It was like really not until I came to Berkeley as a faculty member that, I was like in the environment where it's like, oh wow, you just don't, it's like a city. Like you don't know, you don't know anybody who you come
Right.
across. I mean, obviously you know your department or whatever, right? But like not
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
waves of
Yeah.
students. Um,
Wait, so was it
and
how was it to move so far away from home?
It wasn't really a problem. I mean, my father, again, like I would spend, majority of the summer with him,
Oh,
because he didn't live, in California and so forth. And so I visited the East Coast lots of times because he lived there for like a decade or whatever.
in
And
New York. Where is
yeah, and
Swarthmore
like
again? Where is it located?
it's right outside Philadelphia.
Oh,
And so
okay.
he had been in Philadelphia. I mean, when I was very young, he was like in Philadelphia because that's where Temple
Oh,
is.
Temple. That's what you said. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was already kind of familiar with the city, and I like had some we had some like close family friends who lived there, still do, and so forth. And so I wasn't too uncomfortable with it, I think.
So being in a new place, not knowing a lot of people, it's not hard. Or it
Well,
wasn't hard.
it's hard, but I don't think I guess I don't think it would have been that different if I had gone to Cal, for example, which was really the other place I was considering. Like the program that I took classes through, like where I took classes in high school at Cal, also basically offered me early admission. So it's kind of
Oh.
like Cal or like one or two other schools I would apply to or something like that.
Mm.
Um, and, and I guess if I had gone to Cal, like a couple of my high school friends would have still been around, but it's still, you're in a totally different social environment. So I don't actually think that it would have been that much easier or harder to be here
Mm.
versus out there.
Okay, okay. So so you go super far away, you go to Swarthmore and it's a
Yeah.
small liberal arts college, and you land there and you're basically when you step foot, you're an econ major.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
I think like I feel like by the end of freshman year or something, I had effectively declared, and I didn't. It still wasn't clear where that was going.
Mm,
Like I was like, well, I know this is the subject I want to do, but I don't. I was like, well, I think at some point I was thinking like, oh, law school. Why? In retrospect, I don't know. I don't think I wanted to become a lawyer. It just
yeah.
seemed like, there's only so many. graduate degrees you can get. And I knew I didn't want to get an MBA.
Mm.
And so then it's like, what, law or like, a PhD like my parents had. And,
Oh yeah.
like
So the
how many other
PhD is in
options
your
are there?
mind. Like your horizon is such that you've got three parents that have PhDs. So it's not like
Exactly.
that's like some kind of
That's not a
mysterious
foreign
thing.
thing at all.
Right, right, right.
Exactly.
So you mean from the moment you got there, you were already open to the idea that you were probably going to go to graduate school?
I think I was open to it. I mean, I think I don't know, certainly as time progressed, I think I started to think like, well, do I want to do, it's like, do I want to basically get a PhD and become a professor?
No.
Or do I want to do something maybe more kind of like directly policy focused or
Mm.
oriented,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, does that mean I end up in like a transportation agency or something? Because again, it's like I had,
You were thinking about transportation still.
yeah, like I said, it was, since I was a kid.
Huh.
And so and it's like my son, who's 8 years old, like he asked, well, so the yearbook, the kids' yearbook, my daughter's 11, my son is 8. Uh like the yearbook will have questions like, what do you want to do when you grow up or something like that. And for my daughter, it's like very hard to get her to give an answer. I mean, I think it's probably just hard for her, but it'll sort of be like, well, maybe be a doctor. But it's like, well, why do you want it to do that? It's like, well, because like my grandmother says it is a high paying job or something. It's like, okay, well, that's not like, it's not really that passion.
Right.
Uh, Whereas my son, you can ask him, like, what do you want to do? And he already knows. He's like, I want to build a railroad from like Sacramento to Santa Rosa. And I tried to kind of trying to like let him down a little bit easy with the economics. I'm like, I don't think there's sufficient demand relative to the cost to support this. And he's like, well, I'll just have to make a lot of money and then I can build it.
Then
I'm like, okay,
I
but
can do it
like
myself.
this may not be feasible, but it is a goal. Like you have a plan here, and like I
Right, right,
respect
right,
that, like
right. Why are you so,
uh
why do you think that you've been so in, curious about transportation your whole life?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of kids, especially like males, right, tend to be into
Yeah.
like trains and
Yes.
trucks and planes and stuff like that. And
Yep.
so I guess maybe the less charitable way to put it is I just never outgrew that. I don't know,
Huh.
but
But it's
yeah, and
is it the traveling part or is it just
yeah, I
like
think
the
it's partially like
machine
the
part?
movement, some of the machine part, and then some of the like. I tend to be. I mean, I kind of like aviation, but I'm more like the papers I've written are about like public transport and stuff. So there is a kind of like social, public
Mm,
goods, thinking about externalities
mm.
type of component to it as well, I think.
Do you think you like public transport? Like some people, if you don't grow up in cities that have public transportation, like the good
Yeah.
kind, the subways and stuff, then, you don't, it takes some effort to like build affection for it because you've never experienced it. But like I have a friend
Hmm.
and, I remember when we would go anywhere, he wanted to take the buses and he wanted to take the
Yeah.
trains, and it was like some kind of it was like it was like this public mindedness part. It wasn't just and so
Yeah.
what is there part of that, what is it?
I think there's some of that too. Yep. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, both like, I find it interesting. Like we go to Tokyo or whatever. We went last year and we're like riding the subway all around. I kind of find it interesting just to like explore the system and see what it's like and, it's different place and so forth. But there is also the component of like, sometimes it's like you're given a talk or something like that, right? And you fly out and it's like you get in at 8 p.m. And of course they're like, oh, just grab an Uber from the airport to, get to whatever, like Cambridge or like DC or something like that. But often I'll be like, nah, it's fine. Like the subway is still running. I know the route. Like I'm just gonna hop on and yeah, the Uber would probably be a little bit faster and it's no money out of my pocket because it's going to get reimbursed. But I just feel like, well, this is the way that like, this is the more socially conscious way to travel and I don't mind it at all. And so like, why don't I
Yeah,
just do that?
this is gonna probably say something about my low self-esteem, but like I also kind of feel like it feels really great when you use the subway because you're like actually I'm a competent man.
Yeah, exactly.
I've navigated this complex system and gone from point A to point B and changed buses or something. It's like I actually really like how
Exactly.
that feels.
Especially if you're in like a foreign country and the language isn't,
Mhm.
it's not in
Yeah.
English, and then it's like really well, okay, I
Yeah,
figured out the
exactly.
math and everything.
You're like reading math. I love all of it. I love the pictures on the wall, the maps, the colors, the way that someone decided to draw the maps that way, you know? All of there's so much
Yep.
thought that's given into it. So what were your professors like at Swarthmore? Because it seems like it's got a
Yeah.
really great reputation, a long history of just having great economists.
Yeah, no, they were wonderful. And I think like, first of all, I mean, we'll get this later. Like, I have a lot of respect for people who are in that environment, because it's like we only, like in my department, we only teach like 1.5 courses per year.
Mhm.
And yet it still feels like, oh, teaching is a significant burden. Whereas like they're like expected to teach like 4 courses a year or so, and do it like well. Like their teaching evaluations matter more than ours do.
Yeah,
And they're still supposed to produce some research on the side
right.
too. It's like, wow. Um, but no, I had a fantastic experience there. I think, it was definitely, I didn't necessarily know going in, but I think it was definitely the right environment for me relative to a place like Berkeley or even like an Ivy League school or something, just in terms of the, level of attention and kind of
Mhm.
interaction that you had with back then. I was sort of embarrassed in retrospect. Like I would just kind of like some of my professors' doors, if they were open, I would just like walk in. I had like no respect for like, is it office hours or not? Whereas like now, I mean, I love my students, but like if they're coming in at like 3 p.m. and it's not office hours, I'm like, why are you here?
Why are you in
Like,
here? Is the bill? Is there a
but
terrorist attack or something? Right,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. But there were 4 professors I really worked with a lot, or was very close to. One was Mark Cooperberg, who's still there. He was kind of a macro guy. And then Amanda Bayer, who
Yeah,
also is still there and has done things with like, status of women in the profession and so
yeah.
forth, I think.
Mhm.
Philip Jefferson, who's no longer there, but is now on the Board of Governors
Oh,
of the
yeah.
Fed. And then Bernie Safran, who was already older when I was there and then, passed away some
Mm.
years later.
Mm.
But they really kind of, I don't know, they just, they just gave me a level of attention and interaction. And, I think they saw in me early on, not so much like on a cognitive level, but just a more of like, well, this guy is like really curious and like
Right.
wants to learn more and is like interested in these things.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, um, well, when do you decide, okay, I want to do the PhD? Is that
It was
pretty much?
probably somewhere, probably by like, I don't know, junior year or something. I think I knew. I mean, I had signed up to like take real analysis, senior years. Like I knew what I needed to do
They told you
to like,
your faculty
yeah,
told
they
you?
told me. And there was like I remember one day I was like talking to Bernie and he asked me how real analysis was going. And I was like, oh, I think it's going pretty well. I was like, I'm sure I can get at least an A minus and like probably he was like an A minus, like, what are you doing? Applying to law school? Like you need to be getting an
You
A
need
for
to get
applying to the
A plus. Yeah.
PhD programs.
Uh,
So I think at that point it was pretty clear like
Go to law
where I was
school.
headed, and I took the whatever the GRE and
Yeah,
so forth. So yeah, I
right.
kind of knew where I was going.
Well,
Well,
so
I should caveat that. I knew I was going to a PhD program. I did not know what PhD program I was going to.
what were they telling you? Or
So that's the
what did
thing.
you
The
know?
only the only downside, I think, to my experience at Swarthmore, which fortunately ended up not being a constraint, is that but is purely due to like serendipity. Is that, because especially some of the older faculty who like I talked to, were not kind of like actively engaged in research and weren't even in like the same field, like they weren't necessarily applied micro
Yeah.
people. It's like they didn't necessarily have a great sense of like, oh, if you want to do labor or something, then like this is definitely the school that you want to go to. And if you want to do a more structural approach, then it's that type of schools, right? And so I didn't know anything about like, I mean, I guess I knew a little bit, but like not a whole lot about like reduced form versus structural and like Josh Angrist versus like Jim Heckman versus like, and so the only thing on my mind was like, I'm from California, eventually I want to go back there. I should just go to grad school in California. So that
Uh,
meant like Stanford or Berkeley.
right.
And when I graduated during my senior year, like I only applied to those two schools.
Oh,
Uh,
really? You only applied to Stanford and Berkeley
yes.
in
And
99 when you graduate in
in
99?
99, correct. And I got into both. And I think, but like, I think if I had gone to Berkeley, I mean, who knows how things would have turned out. But like, you can easily imagine a path through Berkeley Econ that would have, and I mean, I probably wouldn't be here because then, it'd be hard to be hired at Berkeley coming out of Berkeley. But like, you could imagine a path where I'm doing something similar to what
Yeah,
I'm doing now, right?
totally.
You cannot imagine a path in like Stanford in 1999 where I end up doing the type of stuff that I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And like the only path I can imagine if I go to Stanford is like either I end up in like econ consulting or I just like don't finish the degree or something,
I actually
given,
don't
the
know a
people who
lot
were there.
about its department back then. What would you have
There
had?
was I mean, I remember I went for the visit day and I basically met with like Tom and Curry. Like, so like
Mm.
I was not going to get the type of advising that I got. And the thing is, I knew by that point that I want to do labor public
Oh,
type
you knew.
stuff.
You knew you
Yeah, it's
wanted
not
to do
like I was
public
coming in
labor.
being like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll do macro, maybe I'll do IO. It's like I knew that.
Yeah.
And so really that should have narrowed my choice set down to like three or four places.
Hmm.
But I just didn't. The faculty who I talked to the most at Swarthmore, like they didn't really have that kind of like they weren't as dialed into the profession, so they didn't know like, hey, right now in the late 90s, like here's the three places you should have at the top of your list if like this particular field is what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So
so
you
so I
had
got
you
into
you
both.
you go to Stanford and you updated down.
What do you mean updated down?
You updated your prior.
No, that's the problem.
Oh, you
That's the problem
didn't.
is I was like, I didn't really know, right? So I was
Right.
like, I'm like just looking in US News and World Report, and I was like, well, it's ranked in like, tied for three or
Yeah.
whatever. And so I think if I had gone straight to grad school in 99,
Yeah.
I think I would have gone to Stanford. And I don't think I would be here talking to
Why?
you
Why? What
today.
was making? Because it wasn't because you didn't want to go back home yet. Oh, because you were thinking I might want to go back to Berkeley or something. When you,
No, no, it was really, I think it was really just like, hey, it's ranked a little bit higher than Berkeley. And those are the two places I'm considering because I
yeah,
want to be back in California. And so that's like it, my thought process really had not, and you don't know, again, like for us, it's like, it's very easy once we're inside the profession. We're like, oh, obviously, if you want to do this subfield, then you should go to that place. But if you're just
yeah,
coming from outside the profession, you have no, like, we just
no
pull somebody off the
clue.
street who like has a college education and knows what a PhD is, and you just give them like a U.S. News and World Report, they'll be like, well, I guess whatever Harvard and MIT the best, and then like Stanford is second. So if like you want to do economics, then like it would make sense to go there,
Totally,
especially if you want to be in
totally.
California, right?
Yeah,
It's like no, it really
totally.
depends what it is you want to do. Like,
Absolutely. So you knew public labor. They
yeah.
what you had positive. Is that because you have positive public econ, public or labor econ professor classes, or is it that activism type
I think it's just
thing,
the yeah, more of the like I want to do something policy
policy
oriented. It's
oriented?
not like I don't believe the so Mark Cooper Berg was like he said he's a macro person, but he was like he called like Robert Lucas was like, Darth Vader or something. Like he's been all this like real business cycle stuff, just like total bullshit. And so I was already like, okay, I was like super down on macro. I was like, I don't want to touch that at the graduate level, like a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
And I knew I didn't want to be like a micro theorist and so forth. I wasn't going to do IO because I wasn't like super into like, businesses and industry
Right.
and stuff like that. So you can kind of narrow it down pretty
Yeah, you
quickly
can
at
narrow it
that
down.
point,
Yeah,
and I guess I
once
wasn't
you
going to do development, but
right. So, but then you don't go. So you don't go to
and then
Stanford.
I don't go. Right.
So what
Exactly.
happened? What do you do that
So
year?
here's what happened. I was dating this woman. Her name was Stephanie Wang, and when I was a senior in high school, sorry, in college,
Yeah.
and like it was a very like at that for whatever the period of my life that I was in, like that I was at, like it was like a really good relationship, and
Mm,
so I think there are two things that were going on. One is kind of like the sort of part of me that had been in school for whatever it is, like, 16 or 17 years straight at that point was kind of like, okay, well, I just like go on to the next schooling, the next progression, right? Which is the
Yeah.
PhD.
Right.
But it was some of my like Bernie and maybe Mark were kind of pushing back and being like, look, you're like totally prepared, but like you should work for a couple of years first just to make sure it's like what you really want to do before you like commit to this thing for like 5 years or whatever, right?
Right.
So in the back of my mind is already, even though I'd applied to grad school and got admitted, and so like there's already like a little bit of like, okay, maybe I should like consider, working for a year or two first. Um, so then this woman I was dating got a job offer in New York. And then I was like, well, I can like apply to the New York Fed and like be an RA there
They
for
had
a
that
year or
back then.
two.
That was a
They had
thing.
that back then. Yeah, it was still a thing, or was a thing.
Mm.
And so I think like Bill Jefferson, who had come from the Fed, like, recommended me and everything. But it was really more like it wasn't that I was like, oh, I really want to be at the New York Fed. It was more just like, hey, I'd like to continue this relationship, and this is the way
That's
it's
right.
going to happen,
This is what was important to me. Yeah.
Um, and so like, so I was like, okay, so then, I like New York Fed gives me an offer. I like accept the offer. I'm like, okay, I'm moving to New York. Um, and then like a week later, my girlfriend who was also accepted an offer at like this New York law firm, like they call her and they're like, you know what, we have this opportunity where you can go to the Hong Kong branch.
Oh, shoot.
And so like she's like, wow, this sounds like really exciting. So she took that. And then I'm like, wait, now I'm like going to New York, and I had like that was like the main reason I was going. It's like
That's
no
what exactly.
longer there. Um, and so I remember like Bernie like saw me like, the next day or whatever, and I looked like, pretty like crestfallen and kind of depressed or whatever. And he's like, what happened? Like, what's going on? And I was like, oh, like, well, like this move is like not really what I expected now. And I was like, well, I guess we'll continue a long distance relationship. And he's like, yeah, you're gonna break up. I think he did not sugarcoat it at all. And I was like, okay. And so anyway, so she goes off to Hong Kong. I go to New York in like, the summer of whatever, 99. I start at the New York Fed. If you want to like the relationship part, yes, by like February we had broken up. That was like all over. And then I was like, what the hell? Like, why am I here? Like, not even in the relationship anymore. But as a sort of consequence, I mean, maybe things have changed. When I was at the New York Fed as an RA, like the workload was not high. Let's just put it that way. There was a lot of downtime. And so, I show up, I just graduated from college. There's like, incoming cohort of like whatever, 6, 8 of us, something like that. And there's this woman who's assigned to the cubicle next to me, and her name is Rima Hanna. And so like
She's an RA. She's an RA.
We're both RAs.
Both
She
RAs.
went to
She's been there.
Cornell, and she had just
She's
like
been there for a year or something like that.
no,
Just
she
started.
we both were like class of
In the
99.
same
So we
cohort.
both
Got
just
it.
like, arrived there. She knew more people in the area. She had like grown up in kind of the New York area and stuff like that. And so she kind of wanted to be back
Where
there, I
are
think.
you then? You're like in Manhattan? Is that where he's
Yeah,
at?
it's in Manhattan. It's like
Okay.
down in Wall Street.
Oh, that's cool. So but you're like in a legit city. I mean, you go to
no,
semi-rural, you go to, so that's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, again, I had been my father lived in New York, so
Right.
it wasn't totally unfamiliar to
Yeah.
me. I'd spent like 6 weeks, per summer there for several years and so
Yeah.
forth. But yeah, no, I mean, it was like it's the most like densely populated urban area in the United States, so I was very different, and I don't feel like
Rima, I didn't mean to get you off track. You were saying Rima was your cohort mate next to you.
Yeah.
So what was
she was like my cubicle mate, basically.
What made
Like, it
you
was like,
what made you bring her up?
so as you might recall, like my PhD is at MIT. So the question is like, how did I end up at MIT when my choice set was California only, right?
Yeah.
And so we became like pretty close friends during that we only had 1 year overlap because I stayed for 2 years, which is kind of standard, but like they'll let you leave after 1 year if you want. So she had already like decided she was doing that.
Got it.
And I think she had, I don't know, I feel like she applied to like MIT and Princeton or something, but she got into MIT and she went there. And so then my
she goes
second
to MIT.
year,
I thought you said Cornell.
her undergrad was Cornell. So I'd come from Swarthmore and she had come from Cornell.
Got it. So she goes to MIT.
And yeah, so she goes to MIT, and like I guess getting back to the transportation, aspect of it, right? So she's at MIT. I got an NSF while I was at the Fed. Like I applied my first year. And
How'd
so
you
I
know
knew at
to
that
do
point,
that? Who told you to do that? Or you
well, I
just
applied
knew?
as an undergrad too, but I didn't get it the first time
You
around.
just knew though. You
So
knew
yeah,
from
my
your
professors had
family or
told me
oh,
that my professors had told me like
oh, okay.
so I so I had the NSF, so I knew it's like a golden ticket at that point, or at least back then it was. Like wherever you apply, because it's like it's a stamp of approval and like you're funded. You don't cost them anything, right?
Right, right.
So I was like, okay, well, I can definitely go to Stanford or Berkeley if I want. I still wasn't thinking MIT. It was my thought process was literally like, you know what? Like it would be cool to visit Rima, and she's at MIT. And if I apply, I'm guaranteed admission because of the NSF. And so then they'll pay for my like Acela ride up there, which is nice. And then, I'll like spend the weekend in like the housing or whatever and hang out with my friend and then like, come back. So it's basically I could just view it as like a free trip
Yeah.
uh on MIT's dime. And so I did that. But then while I was there, then they made the sales pitch to me, of course, because like that's why you're coming out, right? And then that was the point I realized I was like, oh wait, there's like a difference between these different programs. And like this program really seems to like excel at what it is that I think I want to do.
Yeah.
And this is where I should go.
Mm.
But I literally just stumbled into that through a series of coincidences. Like there
Wow.
was no foresightful plan or anything that led me there.
You need to we maybe Stephanie Wang is listening to this podcast and you can say
I
thanks
think she's
for
not, but
she's
yeah.
not listening to it. Okay. All right. Well, but she played a big role in your career.
Yep. And it's one of the, I actually, I did not realize it until like, it didn't even occur to me. I didn't put it all together until like 10 years later. When I was also, I think I was on BART with Enrico Moretti, because he he lives in the same neighborhood as me as in Noe.
Wow.
And so we were like, both just like, happened to be going back home at the same time. And he started just asking, he's like, so how did you like end up here and like go to MIT and stuff? And then I was like, thought through, I was like, wait a minute, like, because at some point, like you're not sitting back and thinking about like how did I get here most of the time, right? So it's like, it wasn't until I like sort of took a step back, I was like, wait, how did I end up here? That I realized it was like not at all planned. Like, it
Right,
was just
right.
this weird series of serendipitous coincidences.
Is it the fall of 2001 when you start?
Yeah. So I left the Fed right before September 11th.
I was
Like I
just wondering
had
about that.
friends who were at the Fed when the planes hit, and then like they went down and sheltered in the vault where all the gold is and stuff like that.
Your friends
I
did?
wasn't, yeah, I wasn't there, but I heard
That
about it
must have
later.
been unusually emotional for you. It was emotional for everybody, but that had to have been really, really
Yeah, it was
upsetting.
weird and then to go back and so I just remember, because it was like when we were there, all the buildings so tall you never see sunlight, and then
Right.
you go back like a year later and you're like, whoa, like what
Oh,
is this giant like
wow.
gap here?
I never thought about that. I cannot believe they were hiding with the gold.
Yeah, I know. It's like
That's
crazy.
crazy. So you end up at MIT. So how would you describe the feeling of being on that campus to somebody that's like an economist, but didn't go to MIT? Like, so what's it like when you get there? Because it's just such a storied department with such a long, cool history.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like they were super supportive of the PhD students, both in terms of just like the overall ethos and then in terms of the kind of one-on-one
Mm,
interaction that you get. Like I think, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just the sort of stories that everybody tells about other departments that aren't their department, but it's like at no point did I get the sense that I was just kind of like an input into the
mm,
overall production function. Like I think you really got the sense that they were like invested in their students' like success and so forth. With the, subject to the constraint, as with everywhere, that it's like their vision of success is like you placing at a good academic job, which,
yeah.
hopefully is aligned with your vision of success. But for some students, maybe they decide that's not really what they want
Right.
to do.
Right. Well, so who makes a big impression on you early on?
So I think the two people that I worked with most were David Otter, who was my, primary advisor, and then Josh Angrist. And I feel like, I think it's one of those things where, on a personal level, I felt very comfortable with David, and he's like relatively young at that point. I think he's only like 7 or 8 years older than me, or something like that,
Mm.
somewhere around there.
He's like
So
early
it
30s
didn't.
at that time.
Yeah, probably something like that, or maybe late 30s or something, but not,
Mm.
not nowhere near retirement or anything like
Right, right,
that.
right. No, back then, but back
And
when
yeah,
you
yeah,
get there,
exactly.
yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah, he was, I mean, I think maybe he had just been promoted to associate or something like that. He
Mm.
actually, I mean, you had him on a podcast here. He applied when he didn't come up as like his job market was so unpredictable, as he said, and like I knew that long before the podcast. It was like he actually applied and I think got an offer from Swarthmore
Mm.
while I was there as a student. But that was like how it was like, the entire range of like MIT to like a liberal arts college in
Wow.
terms of, nobody knew exactly where he was gonna
Well,
end
so
up.
his like his Levy and Murnane paper is like in work. You're like hearing about it, I guess, right? Like
Yeah, yep.
because
And
it
I
would have been
was
that comes out
working,
in
I
oh
think
three.
like I remember I was like an RA for him on a paper with like cats and maybe like
And Kruger.
Melissa Kearney or something. I forget which
Oh,
ones, but like, yeah, on like wage compression or something.
huh. Were you interested in that kind of
But
stuff? Were you interested in?
So that's the thing is like I think as I spent time in the department and I was like I sort of realized like well I really like I find these like empirical tools in labor super fascinating. I was a
Mm.
stats minor in college, and so I knew like I wanted to do this kind of applied metrics stuff,
And that's causal
but
inference. When you that it's
yeah,
like reduced form causal inference, treatment effects, blah blah blah, that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
You're feeling,
Which I hadn't seen before as an undergrad, of course, like because you're just getting taught out of like the textbook from whatever the
but Michael,
1980s at that point.
did you get a feeling that it was different? Like, because when you're like a young person, it's the only thing you know. So you don't necessarily know there's this like,
Yeah,
all
no, I
this
mean
approach.
you could tell very quickly,
How?
and well, I mean the because you would listen to people, and it's like you would go to the seminars, right? And you could be like, oh, they're presenting something that's like kind of transparent and that I can sort of understand, versus
Mm.
like they're throwing up some super complicated model and somehow they got it converged, but like I don't really know what's going on
Right,
behind the
right,
scenes
right.
here, right?
Yeah.
And so and then again, like I was kind of interested in policy and so forth, so it really appealed to me. I think both in a from a policy, whatever, like kind of social perspective, but then also
Mm.
from an intellectual perspective, just like I like things that I can understand and
Right.
that I can master. And
Uh,
that's like that stuff is easier to kind of get inside the box with
yep.
than superstructural things, right?
Right. Right.
So I kind of knew. And then, of course, as I said, like, so David was, I felt more of a personal connection with him,
Yeah.
but I didn't actually, I figured out pretty quickly, I didn't want to do like the actual traditional labor topics. So it was
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
more like public or health or environment or something like that.
Yep.
But I wanted to use the labor tools. And then Josh was, I think, from an intellectual standpoint, I really, what he was doing and the way in which he kind of looked at the world really resonated
Well,
with
how would
me.
you explain to
It's,
an alien like who doesn't understand like what you're talking about? How would you say, how does Josh Angrist view the world to a young Michael to a young Michael Anderson? What exactly does that mean?
I mean, I guess the way that he would put it is that, like, although I don't know if this helped the alien, but it's like, econ should be more like medicine than like physics, right? That, like, of course, you need to have some sort of theory. So, medicine's like, you have to have some theory about like biology and anatomy and so forth, and how like the drug or the treatment is going to work. But at the end of the day, like, the proof is going to be like, does it pass the clinical trial or not? Like, can we do we have like high quality empirical evidence to support this
Yeah.
treatment or not? Versus, physics being more like, well, we can actually model exactly how the world works. And like, I mean, not that
Mm,
there aren't experiments in physics, right? But it's much more kind of like theoretical and not necessarily based on like, well, we're going to do this kind of make or break like experiment or where we establish like a causal
did it feel
effect.
like
And like,
Michael? Did it feel like? Because it's kind of weird. There's nothing about that kind of experimental, quasi-experimental. There's nothing like that necessarily a person would go, okay, this design approach, and here are these methods, and therefore it is more credible or it is more believable that the results are real. Because, but so it's like no one has to, but the thing is, they go together so obviously in econ. And so I'm
Right.
just curious, like, are you picking up both of those at the same time? Like, are you kind of both learning econometrics, these methods, and like separately, you're like, and I believe these things, these results, and over here, I'm not sure I have the same emotion or
Yeah, I mean, I think so because, if nothing else, like the RCT is very straightforward to
yeah.
understand, right?
Hmm.
And in even coming in as an undergrad and stuff, like you quickly understand, okay, like what is confounding or omitted
Yep.
variables bias and so forth, and how
Right.
the RCT addresses that. And so then it's then a natural step from my perspective, at least obviously, others probably disagree, but it's like then a natural step to be like, okay, well, if the RCT is kind of the like idealized standard that we're going after, then what are these sort of quasi-experimental techniques that we can use to sort of, replicate or simulate like a randomized controlled trial
Yeah.
in cases where we can't actually do one. And one of the things that, that Josh would always ask us, which I found to be super useful, and I tell my students now, is like, you might have a research question that clearly you're going to use observational data to answer, but it's always helpful to start as the starting point, think about like, okay, well, what is the idealized randomized control trial that I would run to answer this question? Both to like give yourself ideas for like natural experiments,
Yeah.
but also just because sometimes you'll realize like I can't answer this question with an RCT, and if you can't answer with an RCT, you're like not gonna be able to answer with like an RD or whatever.
Right,
Like
right. So, man, that's I wasn't expecting you to say that you worked with David, and now that whole story makes so much sense because of how you're framing it. And so you end up writing this dissertation, and the title is Essays in Public Health and
I
Early
know.
Education. What are those
Yep.
chapters? How did you get
So I
there?
think that's now this is hard. Okay, fortunately, I remember the three chapters of my dissertation. I was like, I remember my job market paper. So the job market paper was on like preschool interventions and going back and kind of reanalyzing data from these three kind of high profile, child or like preschool experiments that were done in like the 70s or whatever.
Which one were they?
And well, so the one that people I think know the most is the Perry
Perry
Preschool
Preschool.
experiment
Had
in,
people
in
used it back
Michigan.
then? Was it as popular as commonly? Was it the household name then that it is now?
I think so. I
Oh, it
mean,
was.
Josh already knew about it. He was the one who
But
like
had Heckman
shared some
started
of the
writing
data
about it?
with me and so forth. Excuse me.
Had Heckman started writing about
Oh
it?
yeah, he had already.
Oh,
So
okay.
that
I
was
don't
like
know that history very
I
well.
he didn't have the data at that point though. So what happened
Oh,
is that like so they because the original Perry people had like analyzed it over like successive waves.
yeah.
And then economists started to get interested. And I
Mm.
could be wrong, but my sense is like Josh was the first one who got access to the data. And
Oh,
so he actually approached me when I was like, a third year or whatever. And he's
yeah.
like, you know what? Like, I have these data, but I don't have time to like do anything with them. Like, do you want to take a look at them? And then, so I did. And then I started looking into like, can I get access to other data from other, experiments too? And so that's sort of how that got started. But Heckman actually didn't have access yet because when
Mm.
I released my job market paper, literally like the next day, or maybe it was like that evening, I got like an email from him, and
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh, I see your paper. You should come out here to give a talk." And then my advisors were like, "Okay, you need to like, you should do that, but you should be very careful about the next steps because like for sure he's going to ask you to like hand over the data and then like, and so I was like, okay, I'd love to, but like, yeah, I don't know. I clarified somehow like I can't just like give you these data or something. And then the talk got like postponed. I mean, eventually I kind of did. It was like at like the Minneapolis Fed or something, but there was like a back and forth, and they were, I
Why
mean,
can
Josh has
you
his own
get
history
the
with that
why
kind of
can't
stuff.
why are you able to get the data or Josh, but Jim Heckman can't get the data?
I don't know, and I think later on he did get the data later,
Yeah.
especially probably once they realized like, oh, he's more likely to find an effect, the positive effect of preschool than some other researchers. He'll make it happen. And so like Yeah, so
He'll
so
make it
so that
happen.
was my job market paper.
Yeah.
And it took
Where
a
do you
much more
publish
kind
that? Is
of
that at the JASA?
that's the JASA paper.
Ah,
Yeah, so it's my
okay.
most cited paper to date, and it
Oh,
probably will be just because not because of the subject, but just because the multiple testing stuff and the indices and so forth is like something that economists had not really done very much,
yeah.
but has become more relevant, especially with all these like field experiments, lots of
Yeah.
outputs
You
and so
liked it?
forth.
Did you like the project?
I liked the project. I liked, it was a blend of kind of like applied metrics and substantive stuff. I like the
Yeah.
fact that I got to learn some new techniques. What I really liked is the fact that I got to kind of like I don't know, in some sense kind of translate and introduce them to like the profession.
The
Because
data,
like
the
the actual the stats stuff.
the stats stuff.
Because it's like I don't know, like you don't often have the opportunity to
Yeah.
do that, right? Because it's like
Oh.
most people already kind of know the tools that they're going to use.
Oh.
Um, and it's sort of the thing is like what I never told David is that when I started MIT, my in my mind, what I was going to do was like go back to a place like Swarthmore because I just enjoyed my time there so much. I was like, well, it'd be natural for me, and I like TA'd there and so forth, and so it'd be natural for me to end up back in that environment, which of course is not what like professors at MIT like that's not the placement they're looking
Yeah.
for. I mean, not that they're going to like disown you, but like this is definitely not the target, right?
Yeah.
And uh, by the time I was like a third year, it was very clear to me, like, oh no, that is not like what they would want, and I should, like be thinking about research universities and so forth. And I think that, I think I am where I belong. But at the same time, there's a reason why why like Swarthmore, a place like Swarthmore was appealing to me, and it's, it is the sort of the teaching aspect of it, and so, where possible, I try to kind of let that come through in my papers too,
Mm.
like just making them kind of as clear and accessible as I can
Yeah.
to the readers.
Yeah. So you graduate, you go on the market. How was the market experience?
It was interesting, like I mean, obviously, like I think most of us have very positive experiences going on the market. You just get to meet like so many people, and
Yeah.
like, people are interested in your work. Like there's all these interesting people doing work. So it was really good. The types of places that I ended up kind of getting flyouts to were very like they were the types of places that like would be comfortable talking to Josh Angrist, like
Ah, yeah.
it was like Maryland Econ at the time, like Jonah Gelbach was there and Mark Duggan and so forth. Carnegie Mellon at like the Heinz School, which had
Yeah.
like probably still does like have a really nice like applied micro
Yeah.
group, like Brown and so forth. The weird one that I had was like University of Washington, like in Seattle. That was a strange flyout. They were looking more for like an econometrician, and like there were definitely not
Oh.
people doing the type of work that
Mm.
that I was doing. But like
Mm.
yeah, and then Berkeley ARE, which was weird because it was an environment position, and as you said, the title of my dissertation was like early education
Mm.
and like public health. And so
What
I
about
had
the
a
transportation stuff? You're not doing that yet.
yeah.
That's not
Well, so
okay.
the
I was just
second or
thinking
third
of the
chapter of my
environmental.
dissertation was on it was on like light trucks and SUVs and
Yeah.
traffic fatalities. So there was a transportation
That's one of your
angle
chapters, light
there.
trucks, the
Yep.
restud.
Not the restud. That sort of came out of that. So the original
Oh.
one, it was just about light trucks and I think published in like JHE or something like that. But then I started thinking about just weight more generally
Uh-huh.
and like the potential externalities and so forth. That was where, so it was like it was the genesis of the restud paper. But it wasn't the same paper. Uh, and then I had like a promotions in heart disease paper as well. So, but none of it was
Oh.
really like the closest thing with like an environmental link was the light truck stuff. But that was really more on like the health angle than on
Mhm.
the environment and
Well,
energy
how do you
policy
get
angle.
this? How do you get them to make you an offer if you're not even the
I
right guy?
think so. Again, I mean, it's like I tell my kids, working hard and being prepared is like, it's like a necessary condition, but it's never sufficient. Like you need luck as well.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of got in, in a window, like the narrow window between, so this is like 2006, right? And so like the stuff that like Angrist and those people do has already like percolated all through labor economics, right? And it's kind of gotten into public, but hasn't really gotten into environment yet. And so it was sort of a combination of like, I come in with all these labor methods that are, pretty kind of like in demand at the time. And there's like nobody in the environment space who's really doing, I mean, like sort of Michael Greenstone was like the original one, right? But like at that
Right.
time, there's only like one of him.
So he's
And
a couple. Yeah. So he's like he graduates late '90s. Where's he at?
yeah,
Is he at Chicago?
you mean now or
Then,
back then?
then.
Then he was at MIT, although I think he was on sabbatical or something. So we didn't actually end up, like I ended up talking to him more when I was at Berkeley because he kept visiting then, and my
Uh,
department even made him an offer at one point.
but he's like
But
the
he was at
environmental
MIT.
economists.
Yeah.
He would be
But he's like,
he would be the one who would be doing the kind of stuff that's like experimental, quasi-experimental, kind of empirical work.
exactly.
Otherwise,
And
environment is not going there. But ARE kind of wants someone in their mind that might be like that.
right.
I see.
Exactly. So it's like, and I'm like the only person, right? Everybody else is more kind of old school, like kind of resources trained people.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm a very differentiated product. And they told me to give a talk. They're like, well, you obviously have to give your job talk, but for the first 10 minutes, talk about these like three other projects that you have underway that are actually, pollution and it's like environmentally linked. And
The
so it's sort of
cars,
like,
the traffic, the
um,
transportation, that
yeah,
can be the link in. Is that what you're thinking?
yeah. Yeah, and then I had like ideas for a pollution paper or something, which I eventually did write, but it took like a better part of a decade and so forth.
Uh,
So I kind of sold myself that way. And I think that the talk itself went really well. They were like, oh, this guy really knows his stats.
yeah.
Now, the other thing that worked in my favor is that ARE, like we send our students to econ for like micro theory,
Yeah.
but we have our own internal metrics sequence, which is traditionally like more applied than what you would find in an econ department.
Okay.
And the guy who had taught the course that they wanted to put me in, like before, is somebody who you might have heard of because his name is Hito Imbens.
Yeah.
And
Wait, he was in ARE. He was in ARE.
he was,
I can
yeah.
never remember. Okay. So he had been teaching the class that
So
you're
he
going to
had
have to
been
teach.
teaching the applied metrics course, right? And then he left, and then they're like, oh, we got this giant hole,
Yeah.
and we don't have anybody who can fill it, especially not in his shoes. And so then I show up and like I have enough overlap with the field, and also I've been trained in,
Yeah.
the stuff that this guy does and seem to
Right.
know it. And so
Right.
it's like, hey, why don't we take a chance on this guy?
Oh,
And so that
that's
was sort of how I ended up in
another
my position.
another nice Stephanie Wang kind of coincidental
Yeah,
moment, kind of connecting you.
exactly.
That's great. Well, so how was it? I mean, you do such a great, you have such a great, body of work. So was it hard at all as an assistant professor and like, or did a lot of this just kind of feel like you were always the right person in the right gig?
I mean, I think, being an assistant professor anywhere is always going to be somewhat stressful. And you can never get like, they're never going to give you a straight answer on like, what does it take to get tenure? And so it was like kind of, they're like, well, you should have a home run and then like a bunch of field journals and so forth. You're not quite sure where that leads you. I think it sort of became reasonably apparent after a little while. I was like, okay, like worst case, I can probably use my JASA paper as a home run because they're like a little bit more multidisciplinary. And
Yeah.
so it was like, okay, if it's the top stats journal, like that's probably good enough for us. So I don't think I ever felt like super stressed, but it's always on your mind, like, oh, do I have enough for tenure? And I think the way that manifested itself most strongly for me is like they're very supportive, they're very protective, like they don't give you a lot of service, they let you spend most of your time on research. The teaching load is pretty low. I think they reach out to be mentored. Like Berkeley in general is just it's a very, very positive and supportive place to be
Yeah.
an assistant professor. So really, I can't
Mhm.
say anything bad at all there. The part that is hard for me, I think it was hard for me is like you want to do a good job teaching, you want to do a good job advising graduate students. But before you have tenure, it's like there's always that trade-off of like, well, if I spend another hour talking to the student now, it's like an hour less to like get my
Yeah.
paper ready for sending off to a journal. And it's like very salient what that trade-off is. Whereas, once you're tenured, it's sort of like there is still a trade-off, but you're not like I might lose my job because I talked to you
Yeah.
too long.
But wait,
So
you
that
probably get those two big hits, the subways paper, the strikes, and then the restud. You probably get those like 2014, right?
Yeah, they were actually like I think the way I mean ultimately it didn't matter, but like
Mm.
I think the way it worked out, like I think I had to submit my file before they were both accepted. Like before either was
Oh,
accepted. So I think I technically didn't have a top five for sure on my CV when the file got submitted. But again, it's like I think it wasn't such a problem for me because that mattered more probably at the department level, right? So it's like as long as the department knows like, hey, this guy's doing great work, he's got a good publication record. Look, there's these two papers maybe are R&R at like a top five journal or something
yeah.
like that. Like they're totally comfortable voting me up for tenure. But then once it gets to the campus level, then
Yeah.
it's like, there's like
They don't,
physicists and sociologists. And so for them, it's sort of like AER, JASA, like whatever,
yeah,
even
it's the
science, So it's like
the
whatever. But
perennial problem of econ of trying to explain this stuff to others. No, I totally get it. So you weren't stressed though. You felt like but are you like prone to being stressed out, or is it kind of like you're sort of chill anyway?
I think most people who know me would say that I am not prone to being stressed out.
Mm,
As I said at the beginning, like, obviously these circumstances of my life at various points, especially now, have been stressful. So
yeah.
you need to sort of condition on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I felt like, you know, I thought about it and I was like, obviously nothing's in the bag, but
Yeah.
it wasn't, I wasn't like losing sleep over whether I was going to get tenure.
Well, okay. So the way that you and I actually teach a bunch of your papers, but like the papers that I kind of like caught my heart a long time ago are nothing alike. And I wanted to just talk at least a little bit about both of them. But the
Sure.
first one is that propensity score paper, and I'm not
Yep.
going to spoil it, but I'll just say up front, I was so I'm not in education, and I'm not at that time. I wasn't following sports very much, so
Hmm.
I was so there was nothing about the paper that would have like made me read it, you know.
Sure.
But I was teaching that causal inference class, and every propensity score paper that you would read,
You're like, this is incredible, right?
yeah, it's like, and you would not, and now I would say most, if you took as the denominator every paper that has ever been written that uses the propensity score that requires selection on observables, and then you put in
Hmm.
the numerator the ones that should be done, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
that is
like
almost
vanishingly small.
zero, right?
Exactly.
But yours is in the numerator. And
So
so I
that's,
was curious if you could just tell us about it and
yeah,
what the paper is and how in the world did you get
that's,
the idea for it?
that is a great segue because you and I both arrived here at the like via the same road, which is to say that like so as I said, so I show up at Berkeley. I teach two courses. One was applied metrics, which is kind of the third sequence in the stats metrics sequence in the department, or sorry,
Yeah.
third course in that sequence.
Uh,
That was my grad course, and then I have like an undergrad course of like health and environmental topics. And so year after year, I'm teaching this like applied metrics course, very kind of like like a kind of more sophisticated version of mostly harmless econometrics,
yeah.
right? And we get to the propensity score part, and I'm always like, and I got to have some paper on the syllabus. And oh, I guess like I found some P score paper, and I'm like, here it is, just for like, so you know how to
Yeah. Right.
implement it. But I was like, I don't believe these. It's like, there's no way that like you can with a straight face to defend the like selection on observables assumption, right?
Right. Right.
And so like every year I was like, I don't know, like, maybe if you're looking at a sporting event and you conditioned on like the bookmaker odds,
You said that
then
in
whether or
class?
not, yeah, I would say that in class every year. I was like, whether or not you win versus lose at that point probably is as good as randomly assigned. Because if there's a lot of like information out there that wasn't incorporated into the odds, then like you should be able to, arbitrage, like we're economists, right? And like one year, finally, I was like, I'm sick of saying this. Like, why hasn't anybody written this paper? So I was like, I'm gonna go write it. And then that was like, so this is like, you know, the old military axiom of like no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's like I always tell students like the analog is like no research design survives first contact with the data. And this was like
No
totally that
freaking kidding, man.
way.
That is
Like
hilarious. Yes.
I was like, oh, this is gonna be easy. I'll just like download some data. It's all publicly available because it's like, football games, and
Right.
then like I'll just get the odds from somewhere and like off we go to the races, right? And then
Yeah.
I started, and of course, like the actual data is like more of a pain in the ass than you think, but like you know how it goes, right? And whatever.
Right.
So I put that together, and then I'm like, I start to run some regressions. And I'm like, well, what am I gonna do? And I was like, well, I'll just control for overall like expected wins, right? Like I know it's not quite right because like the p-score result only holds for like the binary treatment, but it's probably close enough, right?
Yeah.
And then I run my regression to check. I run my expected wins, which I built up from the individual like win probabilities for each game, right?
Yeah.
On an actual wins or actual wins on expected wins. And I'm like, wait a minute, the coefficient here is significantly greater than one. What is going on? And then I realized like, oh wait, of course the odds are updated every single week. And so like when you win in the previous week, that updates your odds for the
That's
next
why
week. And
you
so
do
it's like,
that.
and so then I'm like, oh, wait, this is way more complicated than
Yeah.
I had thought.
That's right.
And so then I go down all of these kind of like, I'm like, well, how do I salvage this, right? And it's like, so I had to like, this ends up being basically the most like technical from like a statistics standpoint.
It's like a very technical paper.
That I wrote in my career. And so 3 years in, I'm like, why the hell did I like go down this road? Like I thought this was gonna be, I'll just like knock it out in 2 months, maybe hire an RA to do it
Yeah,
for me,
right.
and then I can like put it on my syllabus.
Exactly.
And it was not that at all. But I don't know. Now that it's done and published, and like I don't regret writing it, even if it took
Am I
way
the
more
only
time than.
one that has said that kind of thing to you, or do you get that a lot?
I don't know. I mean, you're the only one that I remember,
People don't say
like
that to you?
certainly, but most people have to be thinking it, right? Like
Yeah.
I just think maybe they just don't, maybe they don't care enough. Maybe it's just like, well, I'm just going to teach this, and of course, like I can't defend it, but they just need to know how to
Well,
how to
that's
do the
what's so
technique.
impressive. There's actually
Uh,
like it feels like there's a lot of statistical innovation in it, and then like so because that's so funny you say that because I was like, oh yeah, this is brilliant, and then you read it, and you're like, oh, there's like a lot more in this paper than just the simple,
Yeah.
to run a probit and then do this thing. I could, 'cause
Exactly.
that was like my whole thing was like, well, I love this paper, but I don't think I can assign it to my students because they're gonna murder me because it's gonna be hard.
Right.
And like, so, so that's great. Well, this other one that I remember, so I did not even know that you had written both of them, till much later, was that subways and slowdowns paper that's in
Yeah.
on strikes. And I was wondering
In
if
the
you could
AER.
tell us a little bit about that one too, because I remember reading that one when I was with a co-author visiting with him and just turning every page and just being so intrigued by it. And that doesn't always that does not happen like a ton with me. I can honest say that for sure.
Sure. Yeah, no, that paper, had the genesis, like had many sort of factors that went into it. One is, as you can guess, given our previous, what we've talked about so far, it's just like the idea of like doing something with public transit was
Yeah.
appealing to me. I remember reading in the news at some point that, there was this strike and like traffic congestion got really bad. And so, I felt like, okay, if I'm going to invest time here, at least I kind of have some sense that there's something there, I'm not just like going in blindly and spending, weeks and weeks and weeks gathering data. And then I like run the regression and find like nothing at all. And so that gave me like a little bit more confidence in kind of
But what's
investing a
the
lot of time.
for the sake of the listener, what's like what's
Oh,
the
yeah, of
research
course.
question and
Yeah.
context?
So the research question, I mean, I guess there's sort of a couple things. So the reduced form research question is like, hey, if you shut down the public transit system in Los Angeles, which, historically has been viewed as a city that doesn't have great transit, what happens to highway congestion? And so it turns out there was a strike where the system shut down for like 5 weeks, and there's sensors in all of the LA highways, and so you can actually like measure how much congestion changes and do effectively kind of event study or RD in time type of design. And what you see is like there's much bigger spikes in like rush hour congestion than you might imagine, given that transit only has like a single digit percent like market share of overall travel in Los Angeles, And so the thing that I personally like, and I think a lot of people probably like about the paper is that like there is this kind of reduced form component that hopefully is like very convincing in terms of like, hey, here's what happens. But there's also I wouldn't certainly want to call it like structural per se, but there is like a theoretical component which does have some actual like model in it that gets calibrated to think about like, well, why is it that we are seeing these large impacts? Given that, again, like transit is not like a primary mode of transport for most people in Los Angeles. And this is where like sort of, I think it's one of those things where like intuitively I had some sense that this was the case, but I hadn't actually sat down and like written down like a model, like an economic model to figure it out. But it was always like, I always kind of had in my mind, like in the Bay Area, for example, like BART, prior to COVID and everything, BART would have like 50% market share of like travel into the San Francisco like central business district during rush hour or something, which is like, like it's a really large share for that quarter at that time, even though BART is still only like, single digit percentage of like overall travel in the Bay Area, right? And so I was like, okay, well, like obviously like its congestion relief benefits go well beyond just thinking about like, oh, we've diverted 5% of car trips or something like that, right? Because it's really providing a lot of capacity, like sort of when and where it's needed. And so then I sort of had that idea. I was like, well, that's probably why it's having this big impact when the system's shut down. But to kind of formalize it and then think about the choice of individual commuters, it's like, well, when are they going to want to ride transit, right? It's like when the counterfactual driving is very onerous, which is say there's a lot of congestion. And then we know that the relationship between like sort of marginal delays and average delays is very steep and nonlinear, which is to say like if the road is already congested, like dumping more people onto it has like a big impact. And so you can kind of write down a model and calibrate it to kind of like, aggregate statistics, summary statistics on like commute flows and so forth, and sort of come up with predictions that like, yeah, even if it's only, even if the rail sector is only taking like 4% of trips or something in aggregate, those trips are going to be disproportionately focused almost mechanically because of like the individual's choice, like when is it most appealing to take the train? It's like when the roads are most congested. So they're really pulling people off from those kind of like high impact times. And so you end up from a theoretical perspective, getting predictions that actually end up like matching the actual reduced form estimates, like, surprisingly well, I guess is what I would say.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. So, okay, I've been keeping you a long time, and I'm going to sort of wind it down. But
Sure.
You keep writing about transportation. I mean, you're like co-editor on all these journals, but I think you're also kind of a part of like a transportation community. Is that right? Of experts that write on. I thought I saw that on your Vita.
A little bit. I mean, I'm with like the ITS, the Institute of Transportation Studies here at Berkeley, and so I'll talk to those people
Maybe, yeah, okay.
sometimes, and then like I participated in various like kind of transportation sessions at like AEA and NBER and so forth. But there's no like NBER transportation group.
There's not. Like, nah. Okay, so it's a small group of people that. Oh, I was looking at one of your papers, Transportation Research Part A. I think I missed.
Oh yeah, that's just like because the transportation students will sometimes take the PhD students will take my courses, and then I'll like advise their qualifying exams or something. And so one of the students ended up kind of like having me as a co-author.
Got it. But is it going to be like, you can still see that you have a lot more of these papers inside you? Because you just got this restat on Uber and traffic control.
Yeah.
Like, does it feel
Yeah, no,
like
I think
you
I
could
think
keep
we'll
writing these
do
for a long
more
time?
transportation stuff. Yeah, I mean, like Lucas Davis and I are hopefully doing another congestion paper
Uh-huh.
pretty soon on sort of we looked at the sort of supply side of like, of basically like how freeways and bottlenecks work, but now we want to do like what's effectively sort of an induced demand paper of like if you widen the road, what happens to overall travel demand? Because
Yeah.
we think we have something interesting to contribute there. And then right now, I'm trying to get a project off the ground with the SFMTA and the SFCTA, the transportation authorities here. They have some people who are not economists, but seem kind of interested in empirical research and experiments and so forth. And so we're thinking of different types of kind of interventions and policies that we might be able to evaluate.
Cool. Cool. Well, let me end with this. Um, if you could, sort of reflecting now on being, having basically been in this for 25 years, if you think back to being a grad student, uh, what do you sort of think now you wish you had known back then that you know now? Could be anything. Could be about econ or could not be about econ. But what do you sort of think that if you could go back and have that conversation with your young self, what do you think like you'd find that might you wish you could kind of say to the guy? You
Well,
don't
that's
screw it.
that's
You
a
don't screw up your time.
complicated
You don't
question.
screw up your timeline when you say it to him.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think three things come to mind. The first is, like as we've discussed throughout this episode, like I feel like I really kind of just stumbled into where I am and professionally, and I am extremely grateful for that.
Yeah.
Uh, but it took a lot of not necessarily likely events for that to occur. And so certainly if we like rewound and, ran the tape again, who knows, like it could have ended up more badly for me from a professional standpoint. So sort of having a clearer idea of like what your long-term goal is and like what the correct ways to kind of achieve that are,
Yeah. Yeah.
would be the first thing. The second thing, which maybe will sound a little bit like contrary to what I just said, though, is like, like I mean, who knows, hopefully I still have some decades of life ahead of me, but like I feel like kind of some sense like when you come to choices that you have to make and kind of following like your heart and like where you just feel like you belong, like I don't feel like I've really gone wrong
Mm,
doing that.
right.
And I actually told that to a candidate who we just successfully recruited, and she was considering an offer at Chicago Econ. So we usually don't win those battles, but like in ARE, but we did this time, and I think that's sort of that
That
it's something
resonated
that
with her.
has. Excuse me?
You
Yeah.
said
Well,
you
I don't know
said
if it
that to your.
resonated with her or not. That's what I told her because at first she was like, asking me about like the more sort of nuts and bolts of like publishing and because she knew I had chosen between ARE and maybe some other
Right.
places but eventually I was like, look, you also just need to like think, where do you want to be in life? Like, where do you want to end up like 10, 20 years
Yeah. Yeah.
from
Yeah.
now and so forth. So that's the second thing. And then I think the third thing maybe I would try to tell myself is like not to be too afraid in some sense, like afraid of change,
Mm,
afraid to do something different if like what you're doing now like isn't working.
yeah.
And yeah, because it can be frightening if like you're thinking of like doing some big change in your life.
Yeah.
Um, but it's kind of the only way to get to where you want to be, probably.
Well, you following your heart. You never. You never know what could happen, but it's neat to see that you. Uh, well, it's your story is neat to hear, and that has been sort of one of your North Stars to do what feels right. Seems to me to be really good advice because you can. I mean, ultimately, you don't. There's only so little you can. I mean, there's not as much that you can control as I think we
Yeah.
tend to think anyway. So doing what feels right and what you enjoy is such a good thing to end on. Well, I'm really glad that we got to talk finally after all these years, and I really
Yeah,
appreciate
I
you
know. I
giving
mean,
me your time.
I expected that like we would be able to connect just because, I mean, I'm not, again, I haven't listened to the podcast, but I'm aware of your work
Uh-huh.
in general. And so I think to me it was obvious like we both have an interest in kind of like trying to communicate applied metrics
Yeah,
stuff in ways that hopefully are accessible and resonate
yeah,
with people. And so yeah, I was not surprised that that our paths eventually crossed.
yeah. Me too. Well, I'm glad too. I'm gonna continue to tell people about that propensity score paper, and I'm gonna put it in a link to tell people to read it. It's wonderful. All of your work is so wonderful. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for meeting with me.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay.
She hated when I call and it's late. I hope I never